What's up, everybody? Welcome back to DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jet Spiegel, and joined today by an old friend, Justin Lorber, aka Future Dodgers, is here to preview the 2025 Major League Draft. Justin, it's been a while. Thanks for popping back on with us.
Yeah, great to be here.
Let's talk MLB Draft. You're my guy that I come to every single year because the MLB Draft, it's so far away from guys who are contributing, unless you're the Angels, I guess, who just draft guys that they hope will help them 6 months later. But this is a world where the Dodgers have been incredibly successful. So before we dive in specifically to the Dodgers, what can you tell us big picture about this draft? Is it a college draft, a high school draft, a pitcher draft, and a hitter draft? What are folks saying about this group of this class of players?
So if you're looking at the top of the draft, there are two demographics that you're going to see take up probably almost the entire top 10, maybe almost the entire top 15, save for, two, three, four picks. And that's college pitchers and uh, prep or high school hitters.
Okay.
There's a ton of high school shortstops at the top of the draft, including two at the very top with some major league bloodlines. Ethan Holiday, brother of Jackson, son of Matt Holiday, and Eli Willits, who, if folks remember Reggie Willits, the Angels outfielder, that's his son. Both of them are projected to be in that kind of top five, maybe even number one overall range. There's also few college pitchers, specifically college left-handers, Kate Anderson at LSU, Liam Doyle, Tennessee, Jamie Arnold from Florida State. All of those guys, are looking at for at least the first two top five, maybe even 1 and 2. And then Jamie Arnold is in that, top 5, top 10 mix as well. So that's the top of the draft. There really isn't a clear number one overall. It seems like a lot of the public reporting right now on who the Nationals will take number one is between Anderson and Holiday, but they also just fired their general manager this past week. I think in a class like this where there really isn't a clear number one overall pick, the smart move is to see who might take a lower bonus, if the lowest person in the same tier, and try to spread that money around elsewhere. But we'll see what they do.
Overall, is this considered like a really strong class, a really deep class, a top heavy class?
I think it's a little flat. So, top of the draft, like I think there's probably like, a top tier of like 3 or 4, but it's not the fall off from like 1 to 7, or even like 1 to 8 or 9 is not significant. And I think especially when you get into the like 20 to 40 range, also not a ton of drop off there. That the 20 to 40 range is where some of those college bats might start to pick up after, the first probably 15 picks where you might see 5 or 6 college pitchers. There's a little bit of a dearth there. High school pitchers, you might see one in the top 10 and maybe a couple in the first round. But I think also, that 20 to 40 range, maybe even the comp round is where they'll start to pick up. There are a lot of high school hitters, though. I think that's true at the top of the draft and also true throughout. There's a lot of really interesting high school hitters. So it's a great class for a team that likes taking high school hitters, which the Dodgers, at least the past 2 years, certainly do.
Yeah, I've joked with you offline. There's one kid I got to see in person, Slater DeBrun, who's projected kind of in that range that you just mentioned. It seems like he could go anywhere in the 20 to probably gone by the time the Dodgers are picking at number 40. But it's the first time in the state of Oregon that there's a hitter that's going to be picked that high. There's been a number of pitchers that have come out of this state, but I'm curious to see where he goes. He's kind of like a Corbin Carroll type, which ironically, I've seen him connected to the Diamondbacks. No surprise there, who's also a Pacific Northwest, undersized, muscular center fielder type. So let's talk Dodgers, though. They're one of 3 teams without a first round pick because they surpassed the second threshold of the CBT. That meaning their pick dropped 10 spots from 30 to 40. In the Gavin Lux trade, they acquired pick number 41 as well. So they'll be picking numbers 40 and 41. They have the 24th largest bonus pool allotment, just over $9 million. The draft, for those that are unfamiliar, MLB is not like the 40th picked player is not necessarily worse than the 30th picked player. This is all about how teams choose to spread out their resources, who they believe they can sign, and for how much. And so it's interesting and almost impossible to project who's going to be available at number 40 because, again, there might be guys closer to 70, 80 that get picked in front so a team can save money, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also a lot of buzz and connections between teams and players. So, what's kind of the national buzz been about what the Dodgers might do at number 40 and 41?
There's a few names that have been connected in different mock drafts across a few different publications. Probably the one that at least I've seen most frequently is Quentin Young, who's a shortstop, third baseman, outfielder. He's local. He's from Thousand Oaks, plays at Oaks Christian. He is the nephew of both Dimitri and Delman Young. So another high school hitter with major league bloodlines in this class. And he, as far as upside goes, if you were to rank him for, let's just say you had him ranked 40th overall in this class, you can bump that up at least 20 spots for ceiling. He has some of the highest exit velocities in this class, 115 miles an hour and up as an 18-year-old, big 6'6", a ton of power, also pretty athletic. I think there's some people who think he might be able to stay at shortstop for a little bit, probably most likely ends up moving off to third base or something, but a ton of upside. That would really be kind of a, shoot for the stars type pick.
Yeah.
Which, if you're the Dodgers and you're picking 40 and 41, a lot of times guys with that kind of ceiling just aren't there. So it definitely made sense. The Padres are also linked to him. The Padres also love to take their high upside prep stars. You might get some comparisons to a guy like James Wood, who the Padres took a few years ago. Another guy who sits a ton of power. Questions about guys that tall. A lot of times they struggle with contact, and that is kind of the biggest question for Young. But he's been connected a decent amount. Patrick Forbes, who's a right-hander from Louisville, obviously a place where the Dodgers have frequented in first-round picks. Good fastball, good breaking ball. I've seen him a couple places. I would suspect that they end up taking at least one prep player in that 40 and 41 range, especially, given prep hitters are kind of the strength of this class, at least in that upper range, and their history in the last couple years, at least back-to-back years, high school hitter with their first pick, which is the first time under this regime that they've gone with the same demographic in back-to-back drafts with their first pick. It's been changed up every year. They've split it pretty evenly between high school hitters, high school pitchers, college hitters, college pitchers, but back-to-back years, prep hitters at the top. Last year, 2 prep hitters with their first 2 picks. So that's the direction they've treaded in the past couple years. We'll see if it ends up holding, but they certainly have the bonus pool to go and get a pretty highly regarded prep hitter.
Yeah, I was going to say 3 straight high schoolers. You mentioned back-to-back high school hitters, but I believe it was it Maddox Bruns the year before that? That was the high school pitcher. So
the year before, so last year was Kellen Lindsay and then Kendall George before that. And then there was Dalton Rushing and then right. Bruns before that. But I'll point out, since we're talking about the last 4 drafts or so, I think one of the differences here is not only do the Dodgers have 2 picks in the top 41 for the first time since the 2019 draft, when they had 2 picks in the top 31, but they also had their second round pick back this year. So they have 3 picks in the top 2 rounds. And that's a big difference from the last few years. Last year they didn't have their second round pick. The year before that, they had their second round pick, but they also had their first round pick moved back 10 spots. Like this year, 2022, first round pick moved back 10 spots and no second round pick. 2021, no second round pick. So a chance to have, 3 picks. I think second round pick is 65 overall. I might be off by a number or 2 there, but a chance to bring in 3, pretty quality prospects, guys who could slot into the top, 20 or 25 in the organization from day one.
Yeah, and I should correct. It was their last 3 first-round picks have all been prep players. Dalton Rushing was in the midst of that, not technically a first-round pick. They're not technically picking in the first round. So,
Yeah.
poorly worded by me and the confusion of the MLB draft. But I wanna dig in on that 40 and 41 situation because again, I kind of parachute into the MLB draft. I just find any draft interesting and compelling, and the storylines are always good. But it does always feel like once you get past 15, there's often 1 or 2 names that are just sort of dropping like a rock from a high school perspective. And it's often because a player has a certain expectation for what they're going to get in a bonus. And once you get past a certain pick, it's really hard to get to that number and be able to give the player the number they want when they can just say, well, fine, I'll just go to college anyways. Is there a world with the amount of money the Dodgers have combined 40 and 41? I think I saw that maybe those 2 numbers add up to like, is it a top 20-ish pick or something? You might have been the one that responded to somebody. So, like, is there a world where the Dodgers almost pool that money together and go get one big name player if somebody's sliding down the board?
You could, not to the degree of they're going to spend that entire,
Sure.
but they're just going to combine them and spend that all on one guy. But you could definitely see an overslot type of guy, which is not something the Dodgers have typically done in the first round. In the last few years, even with high school players, they've gone, about slot or a little bit under with, I think, Kendall George and Maddox Bruns were both under. So that's not how they played it. I think in part because they didn't have their second round pick and their first
Yeah.
round pick got moved back, and they just didn't have the bonus pool size to kind of make that happen and still go after the guys they wanted, in the third, fourth, fifth, and beyond. This year, maybe a little bit different because they have that extra bonus pool with they have an actual second round pick and they have pick in the comp round. And a lot of times, so those high school hitters or high school pitchers who have their number in mind, and it gets harder and harder to meet that number the further you go. Sometimes those guys are getting floated down to later picks, specifically in the early second round and in the comp round. So we might see a lot of guys go around that area who are going to get big overslot bonuses. That doesn't mean the Dodgers will do it, but they have some money to play around with, at least for the first time in a few years. I think they're better positioned from
Yeah.
a bonus pool perspective. Probably not since 2020 when they had the extra second round pick that they got in the uh, Brusdar Gratterall trade from the Twins and in the compensation round B after the second round. They haven't been able to maneuver in the same way, I think, since then, or even the year before, 2019, with the 2 first round picks.
Yeah.
So I will be interested to see what they do, at least from a strategy perspective. I always find it interesting because different organizations have different strategies. I'm very interested in kind of the meta game of the MLB draft and how teams are structuring the strategic aspect completely separate from the actual players they're going to take, which
Yeah.
just as interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, I'm biased here, but I have to imagine that if you're a high school kid, like, is there a number where you'll take less if the Dodgers are offering it to you because you know the development you're going to get there, because you know how well they're able to scout and sort of build you up and sort of set you on in a positive direction as far as career wise, than maybe you take from the Colorado Rockies or some organization like that, where it's like, I don't know. I would imagine if you're a high school kid that's getting good advice, that's one piece. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about was we know that college players are now getting paid. And so the NIL deals that either existing college players have to return back for a junior or senior season, depending on their eligibility situation, or a high school kid and the numbers. I mean, I've heard crazy numbers of what seniors in high school might be getting offered. And it doesn't necessarily seem like to me, Justin, that the bonus pool numbers have changed dramatically. And so, how has NIL changed the way that high school players are maybe, I don't want to say scouted, but how they're perceived as far as signability goes?
Well, I think especially for the top guys, it's a different game
Yeah.
because it isn't, go to college and then you got to wait for 3 years to hit your payday. You can get paid. And now look, college baseball is not the kind of moneymaker that college football and college basketball are. I don't think we're seeing that level
Yeah.
of NIL in college baseball yet, but it's kind of a changed game. It's, the difference, especially with football and basketball, is who's in the draft. If a guy has an NIL deal he likes, they have to pull out of the draft. In this situation, you might draft a high school kid, commitment to an SEC school, and maybe you have an offer that you think you agreed to, and then suddenly a booster comes in and ups their NIL offer.
Yeah.
Purely hypothetical. I do mean that. I'm not being sarcastic. That's something that you have to negotiate in real time. Same thing with that college players. There's no declaring for the draft. It doesn't matter what they offer me in NIL. I'm in the draft. That's the difference. And so I think it's an additional factor that teams have to consider when it comes to signability. And, these teams do their research. That's why you just don't see that many high picks in the first 3 rounds go unsigned. There's always a couple, but I don't see that changing because I think, teams do their research into how signable a player is, but it's an ever evolving landscape. Obviously it's kind of like the Wild West right now. There's still not a ton of rules around NIL. And so very possible that continues to change in the next couple of years.
Dodgers aside, are there a few guys that you really like in this draft? You personally, as you've sort of read scouting reports and followed mock drafts and that kind of thing, are there players that not necessarily, hey, I think the Dodgers would draft this guy, but guys that you personally like and would maybe like to see the Dodgers take at 40 and 41?
Yeah. So I actually just posted an update to my draft bid board for their first 2 picks, which is guys kind of in that range. Not like a ranking of like all draft players, but guys, reasonable, decent chance of being there at 40 and 41. Ethan Conrad, who is an outfielder from Wake Forest, is currently at the top of that list. There's probably more likely than not a chance that he ends up going before pick 40, maybe even, before pick 30. But he had a shoulder injury. And so maybe that stares off some teams and he gets pushed down a little bit. Sean Gamble, who is a high school infielder, potentially outfielder from Florida. I have a number 2 on my list, but really, I don't think I have as strong of a preference this year as I have in past years. I think there's a lot of interesting guys in this range. And with 2 picks, there's a lot of different, we talked about the strategy. There's a lot of different angles they could take. They could take 2 highly touted high school players and, go under slot with their next couple picks to sign those guys. They could take 2 college players, go a little bit under slot, and then, rounds 2, rounds 3, rounds 4, see if there's any prep guys who are falling that they can kind of deal with. So I think the extra pick in the first round makes it really interesting. Also, they pick back to back, so it's not like they can get sniped.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting.
Which, as or at least has been reported, has happened to them in recent years.
Yeah. Before we let you go, I do want to talk big picture prospects, draft aside. You and I were chatting just before we clicked record. I mentioned the 41st pick that the Dodgers have in the competitive balance round came over in the Gavin Lux trade with a guy by the name of Mike Sirota, who, for as far as the draft goes, the Dodgers had drafted. He decided to go to college. They were interested in drafting him again, did not get him, but then acquire him via trade. He is absolutely tearing things up so far this season. And so I wanted to ask you maybe specifically about Sirota, but maybe give me a couple other names besides him who are of guys who, from where you would have had people preseason ranked to where you would have them today, not fully midseason, but some guys that are maybe climbing up your rankings.
Yeah. So on Sirota specifically, I'll do I want to do a big picture thing first, because one thing we've seen the Dodgers do the past 2 off seasons is trade for a player who had just been drafted the past summer. Both times it was an outfielder. And within a year, that player is now a top 100 prospect. Sirota, I guess, probably still debatable. I think he's probably a top 100 prospect in the game, top 5 or 6 prospect in the organization right now. The year before, it was a Zahir Hope, and it's not the first time they've done this. River Ryan, they drafted him less than a year after, or they acquired him less than a year after he was drafted. So they've shown an ability to, not just, keep after guys they like who they didn't get the chance to draft, but also be aware of things that are happening, in this short amount of time after a player makes their pro debut,
Yeah.
but before that information, starts to really filter out and that player status might change. So I think, it's good amateur scouting. It's good minor league scouting on their behalf. I'm interested to see if it's something they do again, just because it's something they've had success with. On Sirota specifically, he was a guy who, if you held the 2024 draft on February 1st, so before the minor league season starts, he probably goes top 15, maybe top 20 if he falls, maybe even top 10. He was in that range before the season starts. He has a rough first half. He ends up picking it back up in the second half, goes in the third round to the Cincinnati Reds. But the pedigree was there. Obviously he was a guy the Dodgers liked a few years ago, but the pedigree was there. He had fantastic college performance, albeit at a small school like Northeastern, which is why when he struggled, it's a little bit harder to pick himself back up into that, kind of first round range. As for other guys who've made jumps, just stick with outfielders. Eduardo Quintero has been absolutely tearing up low A. The stuff that he's doing, at least last I checked, which might be a week or two old, is actual line. You put him up, with other teenage hitters, under 20 years old, still 18 or 19 at low A with something like 200 plus plate appearances. The guy's putting up the kind of offensive performance that he is doing. It's a bunch of guys who end up being top 5, top 10 prospects in the game. A lot of them go on to, successful major league careers, all-star appearances. So I think he's an arrow straight up guy, just like Sirota. Both of them, you can make a pretty good argument that they're top 5 in the organization right now and top 100 across the game. The Dodgers, it's a little bit further away, so maybe not like next year, but you start to think 2027 and beyond. The Dodgers' potential outfield situation with, obviously, you got Andy Pages, who's only in his second year, Zahir Hope, Yosue DePaula, Mike Sirota, Eduardo Quintero, all those guys are at high A or low A, and looks pretty promising. This is a really promising group of young hitters, which is a complete 180 from where the system was, maybe 2 years ago, where there was kind of a dearth of impact hitting prospects, but there were a ton of potential impact arms at the high levels of the minors. Obviously, a lot of those guys have contributed. A lot of them have also gotten injured. But the offensive talent in the minors right now, I mentioned those 4, obviously Dalton Rushing, who just graduated from prospect status, and Alex Freeland, who has been playing a little bit of third base at AAA, needs to be added to the 40-man roster in the offseason to be protected from the Rule 5 draft. So could see some major league time pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's a really fun group of young offensive talent right now that they have at the top of their system.
Well, that reminds me too, a guy that I always liked who never panned out, but Zach McKinstry. How about Zach McKinstry making the All-Star team for the Tigers, which is just a pretty crazy thing. Michael Busch is having a great season. Gavin Lux is having a good season. So a lot of these guys who have gone elsewhere have actually in 2025 sort of found their footing.
Yeah, I think the can the Dodgers develop hitters argument starting to look like they can. Maybe they just have to go to other teams to finish developing. I honestly had no idea the kind of season he had until I saw the All-Star announcement. Kind of wild. He was always a guy who was like, yeah, maybe he's the next super utility guy. And obviously, like, it didn't work out. And, the Tigers, he wasn't. I think he was straight into the Cubs and then made his way in the Tigers. But yeah, great for him. Obviously, Michael Busch is killing it again now that he actually has consistent opportunity. And Andy Pages too has taken a big step in his second year. One of the better outfielders in the National League, which has been huge for the offense.
Yeah. Any other prospects you want to mention before we go? Pitchers, guys in maybe off the radar a little bit. Doesn't have to be like this guy's a top 5, but just somebody that you're intrigued by.
So I'll bring up a couple guys in the Arizona Complex League who've had a pretty good start to their pro careers, both recent draftees from last season. Chase Harlan, who was their 3rd round pick, their second pick in the draft, but their third round pick was a third baseman, a bunch of power, and Brendan Tunnick, who was their eighth round pick, I think eighth round pick from last year. Also a great start to his pro career. Was someone who a lot of people thought might be a little bit of a sleeper, especially he was a Midwest high school player, and a lot of times those guys don't just get the same coverage as you play high school in California or Texas or Florida or Georgia or one of these states where it stays warm most of the year. But cold weather high school bats, obviously Gavin Lutz, one of those, and there's a couple in this draft who might potentially go in the Dodgers range. So I'll throw out one more draft named Jaden Fausti, who right now it looks like he might go a little bit higher than pick 40, but would be a really interesting pick. High school hitter from Illinois, catcher, outfielder, a ton of power. So I'll throw that name out there to end my draft spiel.
I love it. I love it. Well, you mentioned a big board. Where can people find some of your draft content?
So if they go to my Twitter page, it's in the pin tweet, my spreadsheet, and then it's also on FutureDodgers.com. You can get it either way. So I'll probably do maybe another minor update to the first round big board, but at least by the time the draft starts, I will add targets for second round, third round, and some later picks as well.
Love it. I love it. Yeah. So go to FutureDodgers.com, go to the prospect portal, and it's like the, I don't know, 6th or 7th tab over. It says 2025 draft big board. He's got all sorts of stuff, notes, information. So, and we'll do our best to have you back on once the draft is completed and get a breakdown of all this stuff. So that's Justin Lorber. Again, you can check his stuff out at Future Dodgers on social media, FutureDodgers.com, the prospect portal, all that sort of thing. So we appreciate all your help and enjoy the draft. All right, Justin?
Yeah. Talk to you later.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. Again, this is DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. Enjoy the rest of your day. As always, go Dodgers.